I love that it even says it. So
It's
good.
good. It's good that we know we're being recorded. All right,
Good
everybody.
visibility.
So I'm Chris Barney. I'm teaching the game design studio course this semester. This is the first of these videos that you'll be running into, I believe. Today, we're going to be talking to Matthew Moore. He's worked across the industry in a lot of different roles for a bunch of different companies, but today he's going to be talking to us about systems design. So Matthew, can you give us a little bit of personal bio and background?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Matthew Moore. Pronouns are he, him. I got into the games industry a little bit late. I spent a lot of my early years doing random odd jobs, working at the bank, selling sheepskin in the mall, all sorts of stuff. And then I wandered into games as a QA tester at Microsoft. And I became from then a QA lead and a QA trainer. And that was really cool. I enjoyed a lot of my time in QA. It really gave me a good foothold for understanding the development process and all of the disciplines that go into it. And the one that really caught my eye was game design. And it was when I transitioned at ArenaNet from working in QA to working in design that I really knew I'd found like my passion. So I was a game designer at ArenaNet, and I, during that time, also was an independent game designer. I worked on a mobile project for Windows Phone 7. Then I was a game designer at Disney, working on a couple of free-to-play games where I learned all about the glory of Facebook games and mobile and the world of trans consumables. It was just, yeah, it was a wonderful learning experience. And then I went to Microsoft, where I worked kind of as a game designer for a while, and then did a whole bunch of random odd jobs before finally becoming a game designer again, right at the very end of my time at Microsoft. So yeah, it's been a fun and interesting career. And you're right, it's meandered here and there, and I've dabbled in a few other things, but it's all been enriching and really helped me to understand like the ecosystem within which I'm doing game design.
Awesome. Cool. So I'm going to ask you a set of questions to try to get at your valuable experience here. So can you describe what the sort of daily job responsibilities are for your discipline? Like, what would you see on a application and go, ah, that's the job for me?
Absolutely. So with a caveat, because Matthew comes with caveats. So game systems design, like many subdisciplines within design, is one of those ones where the interpretation of what it means to be a game systems designer varies a lot. Oftentimes when I'm speaking in interviews, I identify myself very specifically as a core gameplay systems designer, just so I don't get mixed up with people who are looking for like, oh, are you a technical systems designer, which means you actually do the coding of the systems? Or sometimes they're like, so you're an economist. And I'm like, oh, no, that's a different kind of systems designer. There's, you gotta pick at the details whenever you're looking at these jobs.
That's something that you're going to see across all of these interviews is that, well, it really depends on who you talk to. And that's why I'm going to be giving you one of these at least every week. Go ahead, Matt.
It's true. And it's been different for me. Like as a systems designer, I've done different systems at different companies. But the primary responsibility for most systems designers is you are accountable for the area of the game where the mechanics meet the content, right? You're responsible for that layer. So there's like somebody out there who's doing gameplay feel, they're balancing the shotguns or whatever, but you're the person who's like, okay, we have guns in the game. The purpose of the game is to shoot at things. How many different types of guns? Like, I'm defining this sub area of like interaction. Is there crafting in our game? Gameplay systems designers would be responsible for doing the like base level of defining what does crafting mean? Why do we have it? We also do meta systems. We do progression. So we look at things like one of the ones that I worked on at Disney was for Marvel Avengers Alliance. I worked on a calendar of events so that it would be like, you need to come back for reasons to play the game. Retention was very big and free to play. And so here's a calendar of events that incentivize different kinds of rewards and offer different reasons to re-engage on different days and at different times. So yeah, systems designers do a lot of the like, not just like the mechanical thing, the like, I am able to jump, but like, why am I able to jump? And like, what does it accomplish? And is there a variety of things that I can jump to, you know? And then we communicate for that reason with content designers who design.
And a technical designer would then be saying, all right, exactly how many units high can you jump? What's the delay from pressing the jump button to jumping? Tweaking those kind of details. What kind of an animation do we need to go along with this to hand off in that way? And a content designer would be taking that and saying, here's what a jump is like in our game. Now I need to build a level that uses those skills.
Exactly. One of the ways I often describe it is I describe gameplay systems design as asking the question of which knobs can we turn, right? So if we're talking about, say, for example, like consumables in a game where it's like, I drink a potion and it gives me HP, right? The question for the systems designer is, what things can the consumable system interact with? Health, strength, whatever, what are those knobs? And then the content designer decides which combinations of knob twiddlings become a potion, and the technical designer builds the knobs.
Great. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next question, which is, given that high level description, what is a typical day like? Like you come into the office in the morning and...
Here we are. A lot of systems design happens early in projects. And so a typical day is different at the beginning of a project because you are very busy. You are interacting with the creative lead and the project lead, and you're interacting like on a very core level at defining what does the game do. And yeah, that's a lot of brainstorm meetings. It's a lot of meeting with executives and other stakeholders. It's a lot of talking to engineers about what's possible. It's a lot of meetings. There's
an interesting thing that you say there that I think is important, which is talking to engineers about what's possible. So it's not, design is not a one-way street. It's not like you say, it will work this way, and the engineers go and make it happen. You're going to get, in a healthy, functional game company, pushback saying, here's our resources, how about this? And design is going to be iterated on because of that.
Yeah, and I think that the use of the word resources is good there because it covers a bunch of things. It's like, is this technically possible? Like, do we have the engine to do this, right? Is this possible with the number of people we have? Like, the thing you're asking me to implement would take a bunch of engineers, days, you know?
Right. You can do it, but is it worth the cost in resources, in money, in time?
Yeah, talking to art and UI, they'll be like, that sounds like a great system. There's nowhere in the UI where it can live. Right. And it's like, oh, okay. And so all of those inputs during that period of development really go into forming the design documents that you end up writing and iterating on. And so I would say that your day-to-day is like, come in, who am I meeting with? What are we talking about? Which systems are we forming? Which gaps in the gameplay experience are we identifying? You know, like, this is all fun, but the people who I'm sure that Chris will go over player motivations, the people who have the motivation for collection, there's nothing to collect. They'll be like, do we need a system for this? And be like, I guess we do. Where does it live? What else does it interact with? So, and then writing design documents and then talking to engineers about how that's getting implemented and getting ready for the next bit, which is building it.
A lot of students will be coming into game design having worked in small groups where or by themselves on independent projects. And part of the purpose of this course is to look at what's life like, in an actual studio. What percentage of your time do you think you spend in meetings? And you're doing design in meetings, don't get me wrong, but in meetings with people, discussing and collaborating with different disciplines on design versus working on design by yourself, like sitting down and doing the documentation or writing something to hand off? Like, how much of your time is collaborative in meetings versus private and focused?
For systems designers, and particularly during that early stage, it's like 80% meetings, 20% personal time.
Awesome. That is very valuable.
Yeah, at Microsoft we call them ICs, individual contributors, who are doing content design. It's less. Like, and this is honestly one of those places where I'll mention systems designers often become de facto content designers as the need for generating new systems. And once you start refining systems, it's kind of a gray area with content design.
Right.
So
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. So let's talk about the good and the bad of being a systems designer. What do you think the best thing about having that role in a company is, briefly?
Yeah, I think the best thing about having that role is you are often a problem solver, right? It's one of the closest forms of design to engineering, which I've often heard engineering. I'm not an engineer, but I've often heard engineering described as like problem solving. Like, I have to make the computer do the thing I want. How do I make it do that? And it's not just always copy paste from Stack Overflow. And I think that as content design, whether you're writing or whether you're creating, objects or, levels or whatever, is often more creative than problem solving. Systems design is really about problem solving. It's like, here's our box. Our box is this genre, this, format, this input system, this commercial expectation. And now, like, what are the systems that go into that to make it compelling? I love that problem solving, in particular because sometimes it's not creative in the sense of, look at this wonderful thing I thought of. It's instead creative in the sense of, I figured out the system that bridges these two other systems, or that makes this mechanic meaningful. And you're like,
right. So it's something that we'll talk about a lot in this whole game design program, is the need for and the importance of constraints. And so systems design is all about, how do you solve a problem given a set of constraints? And those constraints might be resource-based, but they also are all of the other design decisions that have been made around the game, all of the other systems that have been built in the game. How do you solve a particular problem given all of that? Awesome. What is the worst thing about being a systems designer?
I mean, besides the fact that it doesn't always mean the same thing everywhere you go. One of the most challenging things about being a systems designer is that it is very easy to have an opinion about what a good system will be. And a lot of people will very casually toss off, like, yeah, we'll just make the system to do this. All we need is one of these. And it's like, wow, systems design, I'd say that it's more dangerous to have that in systems design than it is to have it in content design. If you have somebody who says, what we ought to have is a shotgun that only kills popes, you're like, oh, that's stupid. But like, it's just one object, right? Whereas like, if you're like, what, our system should incentivize raiding other people's bases. You're like, okay, you are messing with social, you're messing with economy, you're messing with all these things that like, so it's a real challenge to communicate to people how dangerous their flirtations with systems design when they are not particularly skilled or being reasonable about it. That is one of the biggest challenges with systems design, is you will say, I need you to trust me, don't do that thing.
Well, and I mean, the other side of this that I've heard from a lot of designers is that, you will have a great idea for a system and you're like, I see all of the ways that this is amazing. And then you build a prototype and you're like, man, I'm an idiot. None of that worked out the way I thought. And
Totally true.
we get better at this over time, sure. But like, even you and I in, the twilight years of our career, okay, we're not that old, but like, with a few years under our belts, most of the things that I think of in terms of design don't work out the way I intended, right? Like sometimes they're okay. They usually need iteration and refinement, but like knowing that as a systems designer, the potential for your error or your inability to see some spinning out of your plan can really have dire effects. So it seems like a really valuable thing for a systems designer to have is humbleness and an eagerness to prove themselves wrong, right?
Yes,
Or enforcing their will on others.
which I don't consider a bad thing, is why I didn't mention it.
Yeah. But I mean, some people who really feel the need to, or the insecurity of like needing to prove that they're right, needing to sort of enforce their vision. Yeah. There's no place for that.
No. You will absolutely, like, every systems design I have ever made is the first iteration. Like, it's just like, you start and you go, this is not where it ends. This is never where it ends. And I'm probably way off. But yeah, you build intuition, you build skills, you build understanding, and you can sometimes on that first try predict maybe 30% of the connections correctly, and then be like, but I didn't think about those others.
And as a systems designer, you've developed and your teams have developed the scaffolding and the systems, design systems to help you identify and iterate in the ways that you need to make your design successful.
Yep. Yeah. You depend a lot on user research. You depend a lot on QA. You depend a lot on sentiment analysis and the BI group, the data analysts. You need a lot of feedback. It's very similar to prototyping board games, where it's like you need playtesting. You need as much data coming back as you can, but both qualitative and quantitative data, to say, what is the system doing now?
Yeah, and there's a whole other talk on interviews that I'll be doing on user experience, user research, data collection, instrumenting, prototypes, all of that kind of thing. So we'll be talking about doing plenty of that in this class. Yeah. So as I said, we've got some years under our belt at this point. I've known you for a bunch of those. What would you say to yourself? Now, I don't know if you actually were like, if you're of my age and there weren't game design degrees at the time that I went through, but presuming that you had been able to study game design in college, like the folks watching this talk, what would you say to yourself as a student, either entering or in the midst of a game design program, knowing that you were going to go forward and need to do systems design? What would you tell your younger self?
Well, I was about to say one thing, and then you said to help you prepare for doing systems design. I was like, well, now I'd say something different. The first thing I would say prior to preparing yourself to be a systems designer is, hey, buddy, you should also have secondary skills. Like, it is very important that you develop things other than because game designers are, there's a lot of us and there aren't as many spots. And also there are a lot of people who think they can do it and don't need game designers. And like I said, particularly if you specialize in systems design, there's a big need for you up front and less need for you as the game goes on. And particularly now with the way that we are doing live service games, if you don't also develop the ability to do other kinds of design, I don't know, man, like, the first year of a game is further and further between for games that last 10 years. Right. So just develop other specialties. Also for me, it was writing. I have an English degree, and so I'm also capable of doing content and narrative work, which I've done for a couple of games, as well as like technical writing and community writing. I've worked with marketers. It's great. But I would also say get some art, get some engineering under your. Learn to prototype is particularly valuable for systems designers because it is hard to convey the impact of a system without being able to have somebody monkey with it, right? The power of simulation is rivaled by the complexity in setting up simulation, right?
Sure.
Like the power of showing somebody an image, the simplicity of taking an image or concocting an image, but the power of simulation versus, oh my God, I have to make this before people will understand that it's good. Yeah, learn as much technical prototyping as you can, Matthew, because one day you will wish you knew more. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's jump forward to your successful completion of a hypothetical and non-existent at the time game design degree. You've just been hired into your first systems design role. What do you tell budding game designer Matthew as he is about to walk into his first game design systems office?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think that we kind of covered it, that thing about like, just know, man, you do not need to prove yourself by getting it right the first time, because there is not getting it right the first time. Not with systems design. You
Cool.
know, it's be prepared to show your work. And okay, to that end, I will say this. Keep notes and keep all your notes and write down, like, I'm struggling with how to say this because it's emotional and charged and also really, really, really important. Companies are not very good at understanding how useful failure is. There are platitudes about like, we're not worried about failure and failure is okay and blah, 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 but failure is fundamental. Failure is important for generating learnings, and particularly for people who are in subdisciplines where failure is the only way forward. Iteration is the only path. Like, documenting your failures is super, super valuable. I didn't do it in the past, and I do a lot now for all of my designs. Anytime I replace a part in a document where I'm like, this was wrong, and I'm putting in a new thing, I copy paste it down to the bottom of the document under deprecated designs. And I will often write just a quick little note that's like, deprecated on this date because it had the following effect.
Yeah.
That is valuable, in particular because it helps you the same way that writing down something helps you remember. It helps you remember your thought process. It also helps you communicate to people who are like, what if we did blank, right? If I have in a document, oh man, we tried blank.
That's a great idea. I had that idea. I agree that seems like a good idea. Here's why it didn't work out, right?
Yeah.
One thing that you said in terms of conveying design is hard, right? A thing that I've found in design roles that often you have management who thinks they can design. And what you said about the importance of documentation, you'll often face, and I'm sure you have, situations where management tells you should do something and you tell them that that's a bad idea because of X, Y, and Z, and they pat you on the head and smile because they know better and tell you to go and do it. And well, you know, it's their paycheck, their rules. So you go and do it, and you try it, and it fails. And that can be really frustrating. When that happens, documenting your initial concerns, documenting how you implemented the design, how you tested it, and how it didn't do what you wanted. And then when you can come back to them and say, that didn't work out, and they don't say, well, try it again, or try it harder, or try my next crazy idea, you can say, it didn't work, and here's why, and also here's the next thing that we tried, and here's why that didn't work, and the next thing. If you're going to be able to push back against management successfully, you have to have that documentation, and you have to develop that discipline of recording failure and recording why the failure.
Yeah. Which is part of the reason why it's so valuable, like I mentioned earlier, to make connections with the people who are getting you the results. to with your UR and with your data analysts and stuff, because like engineers are able to very quickly show that a thing doesn't work.
Sure.
They're able to like, you asked me to code it this way, I showed it to you this way, you'll notice that it drops the signal all the time. And it'll be like, great, then do it a different way.
Right.
With design, it's sometimes harder, particularly because systems are expressed over time, right? Your experience with them changes as you mature through the game.
Yes.
So it can be very hard to be like, just sit down and look at this system and trust me after playing it for 2 minutes that it breaks later.
Right.
Like you've got to have the ability to convey this through like facts.
Right.
Like,
and we'll get into this in the class more later, but this is when I talk about instrumentation and gathering data. You need to do this for your designs, right? If you have a design idea, you need to say, this is what I intend that design to do. This is the user experience I intend that design to create. And as I can't just go out and make that, right? I mean, I can make it, play test it and see if it works, but that's much more valuable if you have instrumented that playtest to say, what am I going to record about the playtest? Am I recording how many rounds pass before the player dies? Am I recording how much percentage-wise of the player's health is lost, or how much movement they make? Or like, what do I need to capture in order to assess the success of my design in doing what I want? You have to be thinking about that as part of your design, not just making up the design, but making up the ways you're going to measure the efficacy of the design.
And I think that it all starts with that thing that you said right at the very beginning of that, which is, what question am I asking? What is this supposed to be doing? Sometimes, don't get me wrong, it's fun to just like create a design because I thought it would be funny. It's interesting. My brain really wanted to explore a mechanic. But most of the time, particularly when you're working on projects in studios, there is a goal. Yep. And you should articulate what your goal is. And then when you've made the thing to test and UR says, so what are we testing for? You go, we're testing for the goal. Is the goal working? UR will help you to formulate the questions to ask, and data analysis will help you to understand which like data points to put in your architecture. But like, it all stems from the goal. What was I trying to accomplish for the player?
And as a designer, you don't want to be just creating pieces of design to fill a slot in your game because it is something you've seen in some other game, or because of course there's a mini map or whatever the system is. You want to say, I have a design problem and this design is going to solve it. And that's something we'll talk about when we talk about game design patterns as well. What's the problem that your design is trying to solve?
That's also just a tiny tangent. That is also a useful thing to note, goes outside of games. So if you find yourself in a place where you are working on product development in the like consumer or business sector outside of games, they will use that language specifically of, what is the problem statement, right? Like, we're making this, marketing tool. And what is the problem statement? Oh, the problem statement is, I don't know if the marketing is getting to people. Great, we're now designing a feature to, get marketing to people and tell us that it's happening.
Right, awesome. Cool. So I think I was going to ask you how you relate to other disciplines, but we've talked a bunch about that, and I think covered that enough for now. Do you?
I will say.
Nope. Yep.
Love them all and respect them all. That's what I'll tell you. There is no other discipline in game development that I have run into that is actually useless. They are all great. And if they're doing their job, it makes your job easier, whether it's the art that's conveying the aesthetics, the engineering that is making the gameplay happen, the production that's keeping me on schedule and keeping me from scope creeping, which design does, QA that's giving you the like feedback about it's basically user testing that they're doing. It's all useful. Respect them all. Love your coworkers. Talk to them whenever you can about what they're doing and how the game is going.
Yeah, it's super necessary. Some game companies become very hierarchy focused, very like, this role is more important than this role, and that's whatever your bosses tell you, that's not true. None of us can make games alone. Like, I mean, with very few small scope indie games aside, like we all need other people to make the games that we want. And the more we value what they contribute, the better our games are. Yeah.
Your bosses can tell you how the company values different disciplines
Sure.
differently.
Which may tell you something about how long you want to stay at the company.
I always ask, actually, in my interviews, I'm doing a lot of interviews lately, and I always ask, like, how big is your QA staff? How many of them are contract? And how are they generally treated within the studio? And people are like, you're interviewing for a design position. I'm like, I want to know these things.
Yeah. Cool. And so here's a question I'm going to ask everybody as a bonus question, at least in this initial group of people I'm talking to about different disciplines. I know all of you through the Conference Associates program at GDC. What role do you think that the Game Developers Conference and the Conference Associates program in general have played overall in your career?
Yeah, that's an interesting one for me because some people go into the game development, the GDCCA program, as hopefuls, and I went in as an established member of the industry. And so for me, the thing that was really beneficial was it was a bridge for me between just being a person in the industry and starting really on my path of mentorship and education. It was really once I started the GDCCA program and was casually answering questions in the lounge and really, like, that was my first time at an industry conference seeing speakers talk about their thing, and regardless of my feelings about how well GDC handles that, it really like sparked that thing for me of like, it's not just about being good at my job, it's also about the ways in which I return back to the community and examining and developing the skills for returning back to my community. And so, yeah, I think it's changed my attitude about the way I interact with peers, which I think has helped in my career because I'm now seen as more valuable on teams because I will educate my peers in other disciplines about like, here's what we're doing. And also has led to management opportunities where it's like, here's a guy who clearly supports fellow designers. We should make this guy a senior designer and have him help the younger guys.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to close out this recording now. You will be seeing more of Matthew in the future in this semester. So hope you enjoyed the talk. Thank you.